Good morning to all. Welcome back to our course on the C programming language. In this session, I am going to discuss about a very simple topic, which is nothing but the advantages of pointers. So in the previous sessions, we have seen what a pointer is, what are the types of pointers, and how we can declare these pointers, and we have seen various pointers and various operators that can be used with these pointers. And now we will see what are the advantages of pointers. The first advantage what we have with the pointers is, the first usage of the pointers is, as we have discussed, that we have various types of pointers like integer pointer, floating pointer, character pointer, null pointer, all these things. So basically whatever data types we have, whether it is a user defined data type or a derived data type or a fundamental data type, we can make use of the pointers for all those data types. So you can have integers, pointers for the integers, pointers for characters, float, and the derived data types like arrays can have the pointers, and functions can also have the pointers, and the user defined data types such as structures, unions, everything can make use of the pointers concept. This is one of the advantage we have. This is not restricted to few data types. It is free to use for all the data types. And the second advantage what we have with these pointers is in case of dynamic memory allocation. We know that the memory can be allocated in two ways. One is by static memory allocation, the second one is the dynamic memory allocation. And in the dynamic memory allocation, as we know that we are going to make use of some functions to deal with this dynamic memory allocation. The reason is, dynamic memory allocation is the memory that is allocated at the runtime. So user has to take care of everything, starting from the allocation and deallocation. That is, the user has to allocate the memory manually, and it is the responsibility of the user or the programmer to deallocate the memory by using some functions. So to deal with all these dynamic memory allocation concepts, we know that we have some predefined functions such as malloc, calloc, realloc, and free. And in all these functions, in all these four functions, the main concept what we are going to use is nothing but the pointers. The reason is, if you see the syntax of the malloc function, I am just giving an example with the malloc function. It is a void pointer or typecast pointer, and then we will use the name of the function as malloc, and then we will use n, where n is the size that is given by the user dynamically at the runtime, and we will make use of some size of operator along with the size of the data type which you want to allocate. In this case, I am taking it as integer, right? So I can change this as int also. And remember that this we are going to assign it to a pointer which is of type int star ptr. Why we are going to make use of this pointer concept, or why we are assigning this thing, is malloc is a dynamic memory allocation function which allocates the required memory, and in addition to it, it will also return the base memory or the starting address. The base address will be returned by the malloc function. So when you return an address, there should be some pointer variable to catch hold of that address. We know that pointer is a variable which stores the address of another variable. So whenever you want to deal with the addresses, you need to have the concept of pointers in C. That is the reason why the malloc function, when it returns the base address of the successfully allocated memory locations, there should be some pointer to catch hold of that address in the left hand side. That is the reason why we make use of a pointer. PTR is a pointer of type integer. So to deal with the dynamic memory allocation, we require the concept of pointers. Without knowing the concept of pointers, there is no meaning in reading about this dynamic memory allocation and all these things. So the base behind this dynamic memory allocation is the pointers. Even if you take the syntax of this free function, you are going to give the syntax as free of PTR, where PTR is the pointer which is pointing to the memory that is allocated dynamically by using some malloc or calloc function. So these pointers plays very important role in the dynamic memory allocation. Similarly, the third usage or the advantage of the pointers is returning multiple values. From the function. So when you go back to the concept of functions, we know that functions can return a value. And if somebody asks you how many values can a function return, means the answer is a straightforward thing that a function can return only one value. But is there any method that we can use to make the function return more than one value? Yes, definitely there is a way, that is by making use of the concept of pointers, or in general, if you go deep into it, it is pass by reference concept. Pass by reference or pass by address. In this case, we are going to pass the address of some variables or some derived data types, whatever it may be. We are going to just pass their addresses, and by making use of this pass by address concept, we can simulate that the function is returning some multiple values from it. Though it is not possible physically, but virtually we are making the function to return multiple values by making use of pass by address concept, and this pass by address concept is based on pointers. So this is another advantage we have with pointers. And the fourth one is we can access, we in the sense the programmer can access any part of the memory. Why? Because we are dealing with the addresses of the memory. The user can access any part of the memory. Actually, we are discussing this point under the advantage of pointers, but there are a lot of complications when we make the programmers read the addresses of the memory. Why? Because I can give you a simple example. So there are some critical parts of the memory which should not be accessed by the programmers. Let us take an example of the operating system. Let us say the kernel part of the operating system, which is a very crucial thing for the operating system, and it plays very important role in running the system smoothly. But if the programmer is free to access such type of crucial parts of the memory, he can misuse those particular values of some variables, which may cause ultimately cause for the crash of the system also. Maybe you will get some wrong results, that is a different case, but it will lead to a disaster of crashing the system also. So maybe we are saying that the accessing of memory will be somewhat advantageous to the programmers, but it is having the flip part also, that is we may have some disadvantage of accessing the memory parts of the memory, addresses of the memory. So you should be very careful while writing the programs that are related to the pointers. Be careful that you should not access the crucial parts of the operating system or the system. And finally, by making use of pointers, we can reduce the size of the code. And when you are reducing the size of the code, so maybe you may end up in writing a program where you have less number of lines of code with the help of these pointers. So you are reducing the code. When you reduce the size of the code, obviously it will lead to the improvement in the performance. It will automatically improve the performance of the system. So these are all the 5 advantages of pointers we have. Let us have a quick recap of what we have discussed in today's session. The pointers can be declared for any type of data, whether it is a user-defined data type or the derived data type or the fundamental data types. So there is no restriction on the type of pointers that we can make use in our program. The second advantage is the dynamic memory allocation is purely dependent on the pointers concept. Without pointers, there is no concept of dynamic memory allocation. The third advantage or the usage what we have with these pointers is it helps the programmers to virtually return multiple values from a function, where the thumb rule is that the function can return only a single value from it. But by making use of these pointers, you can virtually make the function to return multiple values. And fourth advantage is we can access any part of the memory. As I told that this can be treated as the advantage as well as some disadvantages are also there. Why? Because while accessing the memory, you should be very careful that you should not touch the crucial parts of the operating system that is stored in the memory. And finally, the final advantage we have with the pointers is by making use of pointers, we can reduce the size of the code. When you reduce the size of the code, automatically you are going to improve the performance of the system or the program. So these are all the advantages of pointers we have. In the next session, we will be discussing some of the concepts related to the pointers. We will be continuing with the same pointers concept. So thank you one and all for joining the session.